It's the courtyard of the Sorbonne University in the heart of Paris's Latin Quarter, a tribute about to take place for Samuel Paty, that slain middle school teacher. French President Emmanuel Macron arriving in just a few minutes to lead ceremonies honoring the social studies teacher. He was beheaded last Friday near the gates of his middle school in the northwest suburbs of Paris for teaching a civics class on free speech that included Charlie Hebdo cartoons of the prophet. The attack of 5 years ago in Paris on the satirical newspaper was already at the time an assault on the values of free speech. Now there's this feeling that it's the Republic itself that's targeted. There was a minute of silence earlier in the capital and throughout the country. Teaching more than a job, it's a vocation. The classroom, the agora that brings together future citizens. We're going to be following, of course, that ceremony live and react to the latest on the case, including the shutting down of a mosque northeast of Paris that published a Facebook call to have Samuel Paty sacked based on hearsay and, well, overzealous religious dogma. How do we talk about religion and radicalism in school? How do we defend the sanctity of the teacher-student relation? Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at France's tribute to a hero of the Republic, and we're joined from Toulouse by Rasha Nagem, a researcher in the science of education at the University of Toulouse, associate member of the UNESCO chair in the prevention of radicalization and violent extremism. Thank you for joining us. We're also welcoming here in the studio France 24's very own Philip Turl, the France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. Philip, at 3 p.m. across France earlier, we had that minute of silence ahead of this ceremony that's about to take place. And you were saying earlier how the nation is shocked.
This has been a terrible traumatism for the French. Okay, it's not the first time this has happened. We've had dozens of terrorist attacks in France over the years, but the worst ones everyone can remember, starting with the Charlie Hebdo attacks in January 2015. Then there were the Bataclan attacks in Paris where 130 people died. That was in November 2015. Then we had another 80 or so people who were killed on Bastille Day, July the 14th, 2016, in an attack on the Promenade des Anglais in Nice. The trial is taking place in Paris at the moment of those who had links to the killers of the Charlie Hebdo journalists and staff in January 2015. Those who perpetrated the attacks there, the Kouachi brothers, were killed by police afterwards, but all of the people with whom they had contacts, or many of them, are now being tried in Paris. And since that trial got underway, the attack against Samuel Paty by this 18-year-old young man of Chechen origin is the second terrorist attack in France since that trial got underway. So I think all of this has added on the pressure on the French government and on President Macron to take action quickly, and to show that the government is in control of the situation. I think people in France are tired of the stress, of the strain, not only of the coronavirus, but the menace that is constantly hanging overhead of yet another terrorist attack as something that has pushed many people to the limit. And I think there's a growing pressure on the government to come up with some kind of answer to all these questions. And that is possibly something that Emmanuel Macron is going to talk about in his speech. But I think most of all, he's going to pay tribute to Samuel Paty.
One of the highlights of the ceremony we're about to watch, Rasha Nagem, is they're going to read out a letter from the great French writer Albert Camus, who was born in poverty in Algeria and who wrote a letter to one of his former teachers, telling him how much he inspired him. People are shocked because I think, and I can speak for almost everybody, the first thing you think of after this horrific act is that one teacher or those several teachers when you were young who inspired you.
Front page of the French newspaper La Croix, the slogan "Pas de vagues," or "No making waves." a teacher's message in the wake of the assassination of Samuel Paty, who was killed after sharing cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad during a class on freedom of expression. The killing raising ongoing concerns among teachers in some schools about what they can and can't teach in class, from history to science to secularism. This teacher received a threatening letter after suggesting that her students enter a national competition about the French resistance and the Holocaust.
The choice of words really affected me. I filed a complaint with the police, of course, but there was no investigation.
According to official figures, 935 incidents were reported between September of 2019 and last March, in which teachers were unable to conduct class because of such complaints. But it's believed the problem is much more widespread. Many teachers wonder why make waves with students and parents when they feel they're not protected by the administration.
I think in recent years, what I feel is that teaching work comes in support of administrative goals. And I think we need a cultural change. It really should be that administrative work comes in support to teaching. We should be the one who are trusted by the administration. And it's not the other way around. The administration should not ask us to trust them blindly, you know?
Before his death, Paty received threats online. The French government says it's making attempts to fight radical Islam online, appealing to the major social networks in recent days. The Minister of the Interior has also asked police to beef up security at schools across the country.
Rasha Nagem, what's the conversation been where you are in Toulouse?
The conversation in Toulouse is, as I'm working in the prevention of radicalization and violent extremism in schools, the conversation was about how we can reinforce and prevent the risks of this radicalization. And we are all shocked about what happened, as professor and students. But we know that, as you said, at the time of Albert Camus, or even during our generation, the educator, the teacher, is the main person who transmits not only values but also the knowledge. Nowadays, it's not the case. Nowadays, we have different forms of education and different forms of transmission of values, and the teacher has not anymore the same value in itself. You said, how can we transmit these values through education? And now, as we are working on three forms of education, the formal education, which starts in primary and ends primary schools and ends in university, and the non-formal education, which is all these educational activities that are outside the formal system. And there's that we cannot really control, but we can participate in, is the informal education, which I consider as the vital process in which each individual today acquires attitudes, values, and skills and knowledge through it. And from influences also from his surroundings, like the case of this young terrorist who was influenced by family or friends or the media itself, including the social media and internet. So we have to work on this three field in order to prevent the risk of this radicalization.
And we're going to be joined shortly by the teacher you saw in that report, Gabrielle Latanzio, who teaches at a high school in the suburbs of Paris. For now, though, as you can see with these live images, we're waiting for the ceremony to begin at the Sorbonne, an institution of higher learning founded in 1257. France 24's Catherine Norris-Trent is there. Catherine, why the Sorbonne?
Well, the Sorbonne has been chosen as a highly symbolic location, a symbol of the Lumière, the Enlightenment era here in France, of a temple of knowledge and learning throughout the ages. As you said, the Collège de Sorbonne was founded in 1257, and this became a great university through the Middle Ages, through the centuries, right up to the present day, when there was one of the Nobel Prize winners for chemistry in 2020 this year was from the Sorbonne University. So this location has been chosen clearly to celebrate academic excellence, the importance of learning and the importance of knowledge in France and in French schools, of putting science and reason above emotion and sometimes above religion. Of course, French schools are a secular space. There's a strict separation of the church and state here in France. So for all these reasons, this ceremony is not taking place at the Invalides, as we've seen other people commemorated there, but here at the Sorbonne.
The Sorbonne, and it's going to be at hour that the casket is due to enter for that ceremony, Catherine, which will be presided by the French president.
Yeah, that's right. Emmanuel Macron is already here. We've seen him. He's been meeting with some of the 100 or so school pupils from the Greater Paris region who've been invited to this ceremony, and with the family members of Samuel Paty. Now this ceremony in the grand amphitheatre of the Sorbonne University will see Samuel Paty being posthumously awarded the French Legion of Honor, the highest civil or military honor awarded here in France. And then at 7:30, his coffin will be carried into the cour d'honneur of this old university by France's Republican Guard. And then we will see readings of a text, first of all, by Jean Jaurès, the former socialist leader here in France, reading of a text to primary school teachers in which he again calls on teachers from a very young age to impart the future of the country to the children and to discuss big themes of knowledge, learning, inspiring them to ask questions despite their young age. Then we will have a reading of a poem written by a French singer, Gauvin Serre, in the recent days, dedicated to Samuel Paty. That was a family request. And then a reading of a letter written by Albert Camus just after the French philosopher was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1957, thanking his first primary school teacher, saying that without him, without his example and his teaching, he would never have achieved all he did achieve. So the theme, of course, very much education and the primordial importance of education running right throughout this ceremony.
And if we're hearing a lot of background noise behind you, Catherine, it's because you're right in front of the Sorbonne. Describe a bit what it's like where you are outside of the gates of that courtyard.
Yeah, it's quite noisy here because the events, the ceremony, and they're being screened live on French domestic television. Well, that broadcast is being shown to a crowd out here on a big screen behind me, so you can probably hear that quite loudly in the background. And there are hundreds of people gathered in this small Parisian square outside the Sorbonne University to watch tonight's ceremony, to come and pay their tribute. So you've got people of all ages, all walks of life. I spoke earlier to some young people who'd come down because they'd been very touched by what went on, students, but also teachers. I spoke to one man, a teacher of high school children, and he said he was actually not afraid but anxious that such an event could happen again.
Catherine Norris-Trent reporting live from the Sorbonne, and we are getting ready to watch that ceremony, which is due to begin properly. As you can see, the guests who are already inside of the courtyard, and we're going to have that awarding of the Legion of Honor posthumously to Samuel Paty, which will be done by the French president, the highest distinction for a French citizen, which is due to happen very shortly. I want to welcome to our set Gabrielle Latanzio, teaches English at the Paul Robert High School, the Lycée Paul Robert. That's in Les Lilas, which is a suburb northeast of Paris. For all teachers, I was saying for anyone who's had a teacher, it's been a very difficult 5 days.
Quite surreal. I mean, issues were known, but to know it would go so far, it's quite shocking in many, many ways. All I can say, is how much I care that this very day is happening, that we are actually commemorating the memory of our colleague. It is about him, and it is also about schools, and it is about what we're going to do so that it never happens again.
The national conversation has shifted over these 5 days, of course. But when you read the front pages of today's newspapers, it's all about the challenges faced by school teachers. We can take a look at the front page of left-leaning daily Libération, which quotes one teacher as saying, we're walking on eggshells all of the time. Is that how you feel in the classroom, that you're walking on eggshells? There's that cover.
To be honest, no. This is an exaggeration. I feel very privileged to work with the kids I am in charge of. There are problems, of course, but you know how it is. Numbers, probabilities. An immense majority of the students we work with are phenomenal. I teach in Seine-Saint-Denis, in Les Lilas, as you've said, and in recent years...
Working class suburb.
Sure. Well, what's particular about the people I help, the students I have, is that they come from all walks of life. The high school I work at very much looks like France. It is in so many ways, you know. And you have rich people, you have poor people, you have people from, you know, who have been French forever, and people who are recently immigrants. All these people are there, and yeah, there are issues, of course, but.
We heard Rasha Nagem talking earlier about how you know there is more pressure, and because before you walk in the classroom, the teacher, there's a sanctity of the classroom. And now it's as though the parents are in the room almost, and social media's in the room, and outside social pressures, and in this case, outside radicals in the extreme case.
Well, I think that's very fair to say that this is not the high school that I knew or that we knew ourselves. Things have changed. You stress social media, and I've noticed that today it has been a focus in the conversation we've been having. It is key. It is something. It's usually we say kids bring with them what they have at home, but it's beyond that. It's not what they have at home. It's not just the families now. There's a big issue because social media is a place where these young kids socialize with each other, and it's such a thrill. It's so precious to them. There's no way a school can ever compete with such a thrill, and there's no oversight at all, period. So this is something we have to discuss at length.
Philip, you were mentioning earlier how one of the things the prosecutor said earlier was confirming that this 13-year-old girl was not in the class the day where Samuel Paty showed those caricatures. She made her allegations based on hearsay, and then it all kind of snowballs.
Yeah, well, which I think underlines the dangers of social media compared to proper news outlets. You know, there's this constant debate going on about the fact anybody can be a journalist these days. Anybody can go on social media and write a story and say what they like. There's freedom of speech. You know, it's all great. But at the end of the day, this is a perfect example of how somebody not telling the truth can then put their point forward. There's no check and balance on that that will take place. That information is picked up by somebody who will then transmit it onto somebody else who will say, oh, this must be true. And it snowballs, as you say, out of control. And what do we get? We get the death of a teacher at the end of it all. So it is a wake-up call as far as that's concerned. What is the big question here is, where does free speech begin? And how do you control the internet to stop people saying what they want? Because that means bringing free speech to an end. And how can you check and balance a social media system that isn't even based in your own country, and therefore it might be in the United States or in Russia or somewhere? You have no control about the content that's being put on there. And I think this incident that's happened in France last Friday has pushed all of that question to the forefront.
Rasha Nagem, there is already, since the 2015 attacks, civics classes on hate speech at the high school level. When it comes to training on how to use the media and this kind of thing, should it be done, I don't know, as early as primary school?
Hello. Do you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Yes, okay. I just want to say something about social media. Social media, as the report of the UNESCO mentioned, is not a source of radicalization, of violence, but it's only a tool that facilitates the adoption of violent ideologies. And I believe that, as Gabrielle said, that when students come to school, they are not bringing only the education that they have from their families, but they are bringing all the world through internet and so on. What we're doing today, we cannot eliminate all the discourse or speech of hatred, of violence on the internet. It's almost impossible. But what we are doing is working on the prevention, how to prevent this risk and the dangers of social media or internet. And we can start by primary schools. Yes, through now we have different tools. We have tools that adapted to the different ages, like games, serious games, like artistics, workshops. We have a lot of tools that can help to prevent and adapt it to each age. And yes, we have to start by what we call early prevention from the primary schools. This is very important now. All kind of violence. We're not talking only about religious radicalization. We're talking about every kind of violence, such cyber violence, cyber discrimination, harassment, and so on. Yes, we can start this prevention from the primary schools, for sure.
Gabriele Tanzio, people watching from outside of France, they have a hard time following sometimes the debates we have here, particularly because there's a very French notion of what secularism is and what secularism means and how it is taught in school. In other countries, they're shocked, for instance, when they see the ban on the headscarf. Mm-hmm. So do you feel that the French education system has gotten better over the past years when it comes to teaching children on things like religion?
This might be a very personal answer. In 2004, I was 19 years old. I was barely fresh out of high school. I didn't have to make a decision then, right? And in a way, I'm glad I didn't have to, because I think it's a very complex discussion to have, and I think we're going to have it again. My impression is, being with my students, is there is a demand from some students for the right to wear the scarf. I'm not sure what you think about it yet.
But just having a conversation, without going into the headscarf debate, just having that conversation about religion and about religious tolerance and about free speech. It's kind of the political third rail here. It's very difficult to have those conversations. Do teachers have the tools to talk about it with kids?
We're lacking the time and we're lacking the numbers. What we're missing is more colleagues, I'll be honest. When you have a classroom of 35 students, it's hard to know exactly what each of them is going through. It's hard to have a personal conversation with each of them. Myself, this year, I only have 120 students, to take care of. Last year, it was 180 as an English teacher. This is a lot of people. I can't even just remembering the names is a challenge. How do you expect we will be role models even in a way to them? This has made our job much harder. When I was a student myself 20 years ago, we were 29 and this was already a scandal. Now it's 35. Soon it's going to be 36, 37. I think this is the challenge. If you want us to do a better job at teaching them the values of our nation, we need to be more teachers.
Philip, in the UK, religious education isn't controversial.
Well, I grew up in the UK and I remember we used to have religious instruction classes. We used to call it divinity classes at some point, but there was no censor or anything like that on what was taught. But it was totally separate from the rest of the curriculum. And I think that there are lots of schools, this is a very long time ago, of course, Francois, so things have changed since then. But in those days, the school was a sanctuary and the outside world did not intervene in that sanctuary. And the people running that school were the ones who had the final say about everything that went on in there. Now, of course, we've seen a complete change in the situation since those days of the 1970s and 1980s, where now everyone has access to everything immediately whenever they want. And for a long time, I taught at the Sorbonne journalism. And one of the things that I noticed over all the years, the 18 years that I taught there, was that the mentality of the students began to shift as a result of the fact that there was more social media available. And the concentration level of the students slowly went down, whereas in the old days when there were only mobile phones in their infancy, there was not much access to internet, there was no social media, it was you have to listen to the teacher and that's it, and you take the notes. But as time went on and there were more telephones available, people could send text messages, people can look at internet sites, social media and the rest of it, there was more of an excuse not to listen to the teacher, not to listen to what they were saying, and the concentration level and the time that students were able to concentrate got slowly less and less. And I brought that up and saying this is a problem because we are being overridden by these outside sources coming into the classroom. And I can't throw students out every time they're on social media or sending text messages under the desk. I have to try to keep their concentration. So I brought the length of my classes down, or the time that I spoke down, and made them write things, because that was the only way they would stop looking at their phones and they'd actually put pen to paper and write something. So it is a challenge for teachers. I quite understand that we need greater means in the classroom. We need more people working in the classroom. And one of the demands of the people who I worked with all those years was we need more money, we need more lecturers, we need more means to do our job better. And during that period, we didn't really get it, which is, I think, a major problem for the education system in this country.
Well, the education system in this country, where when you compare it to many others, the public system is the pride of the nation still today. That this is the school of the republic, and he was a representative of the school of that republic, Samuel Paty.
Very much so. I think a mistake we're making is we think of the budget of national education as in absolute numbers. We don't think of it in relative, proportions. We used to spend more on education. We used to spend 30 years ago, it was around 7% of our national wealth. Now it's down to 5.3% of our national wealth. I think when this happens, our youth changes with it. So if we care about it, if it's not just words, it has to be backed up with a belief that the future can be better, thus more investments in education.
If you're just joining us here on France 24, we're watching the ceremony that's about to begin in the courtyard of the Sorbonne University for slain French middle school teacher Samuel Paty. The coffin due to be brought in shortly. There you see former French President François Hollande, who was in power in 2015 when there were the Paris attacks. The Foreign Minister Jean-Yves Le Drian to his side there, and a lot of dignitaries, a lot of former prime ministers in the audience, a lot of political party leaders. We've seen everyone from the far left to the far right. There you see the mayor of Paris, Anne Hidalgo, who is in the front row. And the French President Emmanuel Macron, who is due to discern the Legion of Honor before a speech that he will be making shortly in this courtyard. That ceremony due to begin in just a little over 1 minute's time. Philip Turrell, again, this is a very different mood, you were saying, from 2015.
I think that this has been another electroshock, and many people in the political world are saying, okay, we did take measures back in 2015, but maybe not enough. And there have been reports done on the threat of radical Islamist fundamentalists in France, and some measures were taken. A lot of measures have not been taken, and in some cases even the reports have been put in a drawer and forgotten about. And I think many people are saying, well, look, this needs to be dealt with. We've had too many terrorist attacks. This is one attack too far. This is a threat to the absolute embodiment of the French Republic, the education system, everything that France stands for, all the great thinkers and philosophers that France has produced. I think that Emmanuel Macron is obviously very emotionally upset by what has happened, and that is perfectly normal. And so the pressure is on him now to come up with some kind of answer that's going to pacify all this worry amongst the French population, to make France feel like it is one nation and not split between those who are against and those who are not against. It's got to be a way of galvanizing the country, and that's what I think his speech is going to be about.
French president who's just arrived in the courtyard of the Sorbonne, standing next to the prime minister as we await the arrival of Samuel Paty's coffin. Yeah, this tribute coming at a time when the investigation is in full swing. And we've seen a lot of tributes today. There was a moment of silence at 3 p.m. across the land. Rasha Nagem, the head of the regional council in the where you are in Toulouse, in the southwest of France, deciding to post on the regional council building the caricatures of the prophet. Was that the right way to pay tribute?
I don't think that's the right way to pay tribute, because it's true that many Muslims, the reaction of many Muslims to the caricature of the prophet was not a violent reaction. It doesn't mean that I know that many young people in school were not happy about this caricature, but the reaction was not violent. The question is why other students or other young people took violent action. And I think there's a lot of issues about this.
To the Sorbonne, where now the coffin of Samuel Paty is entering that courtyard.
We get to share it. Leaves you, baby. Don't care for us. Did I disappoint you? Or leave a bad taste in your mouth?
Nous te saluons, camarade. Nous,
We greet you,
tes amis,
we,
tes
your
frères
friends,
et sœurs de classe
brothers
préparatoire
and sisters
de
who stood behind
l'université,
you
des
and
premiers
beside you
pas
when
dans
we
le
were at
métier de
university,
professeur d'histoire,
who
de
joined you as we
géographie.
went on to become teachers of history
Le
and
15 janvier
geography.
1888,
In
dans la dépêche de
1998,
Toulouse,
in
Jean
Toulouse,
Jaurès écrit aux instituteurs et
Jean
institutrices
Jaurès
quelques conseils
wrote to his
pour que
teachers
les
a
élèves
number
apprennent
of
à être
points of
autonomes,
advice,
à
telling them
réfléchir,
to be autonomous,
à
to
se
think for
forger une
themselves,
opinion.
to make
Conseils
yourselves your own
auxquels,
opinion.
Samuel, tu as été fidèle.
These were values that you, Samuel, you
Vous tenez en
upheld.
vos mains l'intelligence
You had
et l'âme des
intelligence
enfants.
and
Vous êtes responsable de la
the
patrie.
minds of children in your hands.
Les enfants qui vous sont confiés
Children
n'auront pas
who were given
seulement à
unto your
écrire et à
custodianship.
déchiffrer une lettre, à lire une enseigne au coin d'une rue, à faire une
Those
addition
children
et une
who you taught.
multiplication. Ils sont français.
Those children who you
Ils
taught
doivent
were
connaître la
French.
France, sa géographie,
And it was up
et
to you
son
to teach
histoire,
them about French
son
history,
corps
French
et son
geography,
âme.
its body and soul.
Ils seront citoyens,
Those students
Et
who
ils
would go on
doivent
to become
savoir
citizens.
ce qu'est une
And
démocratie
it is up
libre,
to you to teach them what
quels
free
droits
democracy is,
leur confère,
what rights
quels
they
devoirs
have, and
leur
what
impose
duties come
la
along with
souveraineté
that
de la nation.
in being citizens of that nation.
Enfin, ils seront hommes. Et il
These
faut qu'ils
students
aient une
will
idée
become
de
adults,
l'homme.
and they need to know
Il faut qu'ils sachent
what an adult
quelle
is,
est la racine
what
de
men
toutes nos
and
misères.
women are.
L'égoïsme aux formes multiples.
They need to know what our failings
Il faut
are
qu'ils
as
sachent
people.
quel est
It
le
was up to you to
principe de
teach
notre
them what the
grandeur,
principles are behind what
la
makes our country
fierté
great,
unie à la tendresse.
what makes us proud,
Il faut
but
leur
also
montrer
caring.
la grandeur de la pensée.
It was up to you to show
Il faut
them
leur enseigner le
the power
respect
of thought
et le culte
and
de
knowledge.
l'âme, en éveillant
It
en
was
eux
up to
le
you
sentiment
to teach them
de l'infini, qui est
that
notre joie,
what
et
makes
aussi notre
life so
force.
great is that it is full of
Car c'est
endless
par lui
possibilities.
que nous triompherons du mal,
And
de
it is through that
l'obscurité,
knowledge that we
et de
will
la mort.
overcome the darkness of
Sachant
not
bien
knowing
lire,
and move into the
l'écolier, qui est très
enlightenment
curieux,
of knowledge.
aurait bien vite, avec 7 ou 8 livres choisis, une idée très générale, il est vrai, mais très
You
haute,
taught them a
de
great
l'espèce
ideal,
humaine, de la
ideal
structure
of
du monde, de
mankind,
l'histoire
what
propre
made up
de la
the
terre dans
world.
le monde, du rôle
You taught them
propre de
of the
la
role of
France
man
dans
in
l'humanité. Le maître
all of mankind's
doit
history.
intervenir pour aider ce premier travail de l'esprit. Il n'est
You
pas nécessaire
taught
qu'il dise
them
beaucoup,
to think through your
qu'il
teachings.
fasse de longues leçons. Il suffit que
It wasn't
tous les
about
détails qu'il leur
lengthy
donnera
courses,
concourent
it was just
nettement
about giving
à un
them
tableau
key
d'ensemble.
information, the key details,
De ce
so
que
that they
l'on
can
sait,
understand the greater whole.
De l'homme primitif à l'homme d'aujourd'hui,
You taught them of
quelle
history,
prodigieuse
come from
transformation.
primitive man up to modern day man, and you
Il
taught
est
them
aisé à l'instituteur et au
how it had
professeur,
gone through so
en
much
quelques
change.
traits,
And
de
just
faire sentir
in
à l'enfant
a few classes,
l'effort
you were able to
inouï de la
give
pensée humaine.
those children
Je dis donc au maître
the
et au
understanding
professeur,
of what it
pour me
is
résumer,
to have limitless
lorsque
capabilities,
d'une part,
limitless thought.
vous aurez appris aux enfants à lire à fond, et lorsque d'autre
You
part,
taught them
en
the
quelques
love
mots
of reading.
familières et graves, vous leur aurez parlé de grandes choses,
You taught them
qui prêtent la
of the
pensée et la
wonders
conscience humaine,
of what it means to
vous
be part
aurez
of
sans peine,
mankind.
en quelques années, fait œuvre complète
And
d'éducateur.
in the few years that you're able to
Dans
teach
chaque
some of those
intelligence,
children, you're able
il y
to
aura un
give them so
sommet.
much.
Et ce jour-là, bien des choses changeront.
But in your teachings, you chose to teach certain things, which unfortunately led to your demise, and we feel so sad to see you go.
And next, we're going to hear a poem that was composed by the French singer-songwriter Gervais Serres. It's going to
À
be read
Samuel
out.
Paty.
Samuel Paty.
Paraît qu'on s'habitue aux larmes de la nation.
Some say you get used to a nation
Ce
crying.
matin, on s'est tu
This morning,
sous le coup de
I could
l'émotion.
not. The emotion to trying.
Paraît qu'on s'habitue quand
Some
la
say you get
femme
used
est
to
légion.
a world so abject,
Tous ces hommes
where men
abattus
are cut down
pour les traits d'un
for
crayon.
drawing, for using a pen.
Paraît qu'on s'habitue à
Some say
défendre à
you get
tout
used
prix
to
les
fighting
trois
so
mots qu'on a
hard
lus
to
au
defend the
fronton des
ideals
mairies.
carved in stone at town halls.
Paraît qu'on s'habitue quand on
Some
manque
say
de
you get
savoir.
used to falling
Par
behind.
chance, on
But
a
I'm
tous
sure
eu un
we all
professeur
hold a
d'histoire.
dear teacher in our hearts.
Paraît qu'on s'habitue à la pire
Some say you
barbarie,
get used to seeing atrocities in life.
mais jamais on n'y a cru.
But I never thought
Et
it possible.
pas plus aujourd'hui.
Not ever, not even now.
Paraît qu'on s'habitue
Some
aux
say
horreurs
you get
qu'on vit
used to
là,
the horror and pain.
mais l'innocent qu'on
But
tue
never will I get used to seeing the innocent slain.
And next, we're going to hear the letter that French writer Albert Camus wrote to his primary school teacher after winning the Nobel Literature Prize.
Lettre de Camus à son instituteur,
Letter
Louis Germain,
by Albert Camus to
écrite
his
le
former
jour où il a
teacher,
reçu le prix Nobel de
sent on the
littérature,
day he received notification of winning the
19
Nobel
novembre
Prize,
1957.
19th of November 1957.
Cher Monsieur Germain,
Mr.
j'ai
Germain,
laissé s'éteindre un peu le bruit qui m'a entouré tous ces jours-ci,
I have been
avant
surrounded
de
by
venir
much
vous parler
noise
un
of
peu
these
de
late
tout mon
days,
cœur.
and I would like to take respite
On
from
vient
that
de
to
me
write to
faire
you.
un bien trop grand honneur, que
The
je n'ai
honor
ni
that is done
recherché,
unto me is far
ni
too great.
sollicité.
I did not ask for
Mais
it.
quand j'ai appris la nouvelle,
But when I
ma
learnt of the
première
news,
pensée,
my first
après ma
thought,
mère,
after
a été
going out
pour
to my mother, was of you.
sans vous, sans cette main
Without you,
affectueuse que vous
without
avez
that
tendue
caring
au
hand that
petit
you
enfant pauvre
handed
que
out
je
to me,
suis, que
to a poor
j'étais,
child that I
sans votre
was,
enseignement et votre
without your
exemple,
teaching, your
rien de tout cela
exemplarity,
ne serait arrivé.
nothing of what is happening today
Je
would
ne me
ever
fais
have
pas
come
un
to
monde
pass.
de cette sorte d'honneur, mais
This is a
celui-là
far
est
too
du
great
moins
honor,
une occasion pour vous
but
dire ce que vous
it
avez
is my
été
opportunity
et
for
êtes
me
toujours pour moi,
to tell
et pour
you
vous
what you
assurer
meant
que
to
vos
me.
efforts,
It is
votre
thanks to you, to your
travail
effort, to your
et le
work,
cœur
to your
généreux que
labours,
vous
to
imitiez
your generous
sont
heart,
toujours vivants chez un de vos petits écoliers
that I
qui,
am,
malgré
as one of your
l'âge,
former
n'a pas
students,
cessé d'être
has
votre
been able to
reconnaissant
come what I am
élève.
today, and I am
Je vous
forever
embrasse
grateful unto you.
de toutes mes forces.
I
Albert
thank you from the
Camus.
bottom of my heart, Albert Camus.
Watching live coverage of the national tribute to Samuel Paty, that slain French schoolteacher, the French president, Emmanuel Macron, to speak next.
Mesdames, Messieurs,
Ladies and gentlemen,
ce soir, je n'aurai pas de mots pour évoquer la
this
lutte
evening,
contre l'islamisme
I have no
politique.
words to describe what it means to fight against radical Islamism, political Islamism, that leads to what we have seen
Le
today.
mal, je l'ai nommé.
I have
Les
already
actions,
spoken on
nous
this.
les avons
I have put
décidées,
words to
nous les avons
events.
durcies, nous les mènerons jusqu'au bout.
We have carried out actions, and we will continue to do so.
Ce soir, je ne parlerai pas du cortège
This
de
evening,
terroristes,
I will not
de leurs
speak of those
complices
terrorists
et
out
de
there and
tous
their
les lâches qui ont
accomplices
commis
out there and all of
et
those
rendu
cowards
possible cet attentat.
who were behind the
Je ne
events.
parlerai pas
I will not speak
de ceux qui ont
neither
livré son nom aux
of
barbares.
those who have
Ils
given
ne le
their
méritent
names
pas.
over to barbarism. They are
Le
not
nom,
worthy
eux,
of being named.
N'en ont même plus.
We will no longer name them.
Ce soir, je ne parlerai pas
This
davantage
evening,
de
I will
l'indispensable
not
unité
talk
que toutes
of
les
how we
Françaises
must
et
stand
tous les Français
united, all
ressentent.
French men and women,
Elle est précieuse
because standing united is so
et oblige
precious.
tous les responsables à s'exprimer avec justesse,
And I call on those
et à
elected
agir
officials to speak
avec exigence.
with fairness, but to act in a demanding manner.
Non. Ce soir, je veux parler de
This
votre
evening,
fils.
I want to speak of a son,
Je veux parler de votre frère,
a brother,
de votre oncle,
an uncle,
de celui que vous avez aimé,
a man that you
de
loved,
ton père.
a father.
Ce soir, je veux parler de votre collègue,
I want to speak of a work
de
colleague,
votre professeur,
a teacher,
tombé parce qu'il avait fait
a man
le
who
choix
was cut down
d'enseigner,
because he chose to teach,
assassiné
a
parce
man
qu'il
who was
avait
murdered
décidé d'apprendre à
because he
ses
decided
élèves
that it was up
devenir
to him to
citoyens,
teach his students how to become citizens,
apprendre les
to teach
devoirs
his students of the
pour les
duties
remplir,
that they have to
apprendre les
fulfill,
libertés
to teach them of freedom
pour les exercer.
so that they could fulfill their
Ce
duty as
soir.
citizens.
Je veux vous parler
This evening,
de Samuel
I
Paty.
want to speak to you about Samuel Paty.
Samuel Paty aimait les livres,
Samuel Paty was a
Le
lover
savoir.
of books, of knowledge.
plus que tout.
He loved it more than anything else.
Son appartement était une bibliothèque.
The apartment where he lived
Ses
was
plus beaux
a
cadeaux,
library,
des livres pour apprendre.
because what more beautiful than books to be able to
Il aimait
learn?
les livres pour transmettre à
He
ses
loved books
élèves
for their
comme à ses
ability to be
proches
able to
la
hand
passion
on
de la
to his
connaissance,
students
le
and his
goût de
loved
la
ones
liberté.
the love of learning and freedom.
Après avoir étudié l'histoire à Lyon
Having
et
learnt
avoir
and studied
envisagé
history
devenir
in Lyon
chercheur,
and wanting to
il
become
avait
a
emprunté
researcher,
la voie tracée par vous,
he
ses parents,
took down the path that his parents had taken
instituteurs et
years
directeurs
before,
d'école à Moulins,
teachers and head principals of
en
schools at
devenant
Moulins.
chercheur en pédagogie,
He became
comme il aimait à
a
se
researcher
définir,
of teaching sciences
en
so
devenant
that he
professeur.
become a teacher.
Aussi, ne pouvait-on trouver meilleur endroit que la Sorbonne,
What better place than here,
notre
La
lieu de
Sorbonne,
savoir universel depuis
this
plus de 8
place of
siècles,
universal
le lieu de
knowledge,
l'humanisme,
of humanism?
pour que la nation
What
puisse lui
better
rendre
place than
cet
here
hommage.
for us to pay homage and tribute to you?
Samuel Paty aimait passionnément
Samuel
enseigner,
Paty was a lover of teaching,
et il le fit si bien. Dans
and he did
plusieurs
it so
collèges
well.
et
He
lycées,
taught in
jusqu'à celui
middle
de
schools and high
Conflans-Saint-Honoré.
schools before ending up at the middle school in
Nous avons
Conflans-Saint-Honoré.
tous, ancré dans nos cœurs,
In all
dans
of
nos
us,
mémoires, le souvenir d'un professeur
I'm sure we
qui a
all
changé le
have
cours de notre
a
existence.
recollection of
Vous
some
savez,
teacher in our past that changed the
cet
course of
instituteur
our
qui nous a
lives.
appris à lire,
A teacher who taught us to read,
à compter, à nous faire
count,
confiance.
to have faith in
Cet
ourselves.
enseignant qui ne nous a pas seulement appris un
A teacher
savoir,
who not just imparted
nous a
knowledge
ouvert
upon
un chemin.
us, but who opened up new pathways
un regard,
because they gave us a book, because they just
un instant
looked
passé
at us, because they shared time with
par
us,
sa considération.
because they held us in some level of
Samuel Paty
esteem.
était de cela.
Samuel Paty was such a teacher.
De ces professeurs que l'on n'oublie pas.
Of those
De ces
teachers that
passionnés
we do not
capables de
forget.
passer des nuits à apprendre l'histoire des
Those
religions
teachers
pour mieux
who
comprendre
could
ses
spend
élèves,
hours,
leurs
nights,
croyances, de
finding
ces
ways of
humbles
teaching the history of religion
qui se remettaient
to their
mille
students.
fois en question,
Those sorts of
comme
teachers
pour ce
who
cours
question
sur la
themselves day in,
liberté
day out,
d'expression et la
especially
liberté de
in
conscience qu'il préparait depuis
these cases,
juillet
where Samuel Paty In had been
Encore l'été
preparing
dernier,
his class on freedom
à
of
Moulins,
speech
à vos côtés,
for months to be able to teach it to
et
his
des
students.
doutes qu'il partageait
Teachers
par
who have
exigence,
doubts,
par délicatesse.
but they have doubts because they care for what they do.
Samuel Paty incarnait au fond
Samuel Paty
le professeur
embodied
dont
that
rêvait Jaurès
teacher
dans cette
that
lettre
Jaurès
aux
once dreamed
instituteurs
of
qui vient d'être lue.
in the
La
letter to
fermeté
teachers
unie à la
that we
tendresse.
just heard a few moments ago.
Celui qui montre la
Teachers who have
grandeur
to
de
show
la
caring
pensée
for students.
enseigne le respect,
Teachers who teach
donne à
respect,
voir
who
ce qu'est
share
la
knowledge,
civilisation,
who teach what a
Celui
civilization is.
qui s'était donné pour tâche de faire des républicains.
Teachers who are
Alors reviennent
tasked
comme
with
en écho
creating
les mots de
future
Ferdinand
citizens of the French
Buisson.
Republic.
Pour faire un républicain, écrivait-il,
Because it is up to
il
those
faut
teachers
prendre l'être humain
to
si
create
petit
a
et si
Republican
humble
citizen.
qu'il
But
soit,
to be able to do that,
et lui
you
donner
need to take the
l'idée
youngest
qu'il faut penser par
of
lui-même,
teachers, youngest of
qu'il ne doit
students,
ni foi
and teach
ni
them that you
obéissance à
don't need
personne,
faith
que
or
c'est à
to
lui de chercher la
obey anyone.
vérité,
It is up to each individual
et
person
non pas à la
to seek
recevoir
out the
toute
truth.
faite d'un maître, d'un
And to not
directeur,
just
d'un chef, quel qu'il soit.
take whatever their leader says to them.
Faire des républicains.
It is about creating Republican
C'était le
citizens.
combat de Samuel Paty.
That is the combat that Samuel Paty fought.
Et si cette tâche, aujourd'hui, peut paraître titanesque,
And while today it may seem like an
notamment là où la violence,
unsurmountable task, when
l'intimidation,
violence, when threats are
parfois
so
la
rife,
résignation prennent le dessus,
sometimes it is so easy and
Elle est
tempting to
plus
just
essentielle,
give in.
plus
But
actuelle
at a
que
current
jamais.
time like that, it is so essential to not.
En France,
Here in
nous aimons
France,
notre nation, sa
we live in a
géographie, ses
nation
paysages et son histoire,
its own
sa
geography, its own
culture et ses
history, its
métamorphoses,
culture,
son
and all of
esprit
the
et son
changes
cœur.
that it is going through.
Et nous voulons l'enseigner à tous nos
And
enfants.
here in France, we want to teach
Ici,
all
en France,
of
nous
our
aimons le
children,
projet
because
tout
in
à la
France,
fois terrien et universel que porte
we
la
so
République.
deeply believe in
Son
what
ordre
the French
et
Republic
ses
has to offer,
promesses.
in the order
Chaque jour
that it can bring,
recommencer.
in the promises that it makes to the citizens
Alors
that
oui.
live within it.
Dans chaque école, dans chaque
Yes, in
collège,
every
dans chaque
school,
lycée,
primary school, middle school, high
nous
school,
redonnerons aux professeurs le pouvoir
we will
de
give
faire des
teachers the ability,
républicains la
the
place et
power to create
l'autorité qui leur
Republican
reviennent.
citizens, to be able to give them the authority
Nous les
to do
formerons,
so. We will train them,
les considérerons comme il se doit, nous les
and we will
soutiendrons,
hold them in the
nous les
esteem that they
protégerons
deserve.
autant qu'il le faudra,
We will protect
dans
them
l'école comme
to
hors
whatever
de
extent is
l'école.
necessary, either in school or outside of the school.
Les pressions, l'abus
We'll protect them from
d'ignorance et
pressure.
d'obéissance que certains voudraient instaurer
We'll protect them from
n'ont
ignorance,
pas leur place chez nous.
because ignorance has no place in our French society.
Je voudrais que ma vie et ma mort
I want
servent
my
de
life
quelque chose,
and my death to serve some purpose.
avait-il dit un jour,
That's something that he once
comme
said.
par prescience.
It was almost like a premonitionary thought.
Alors, pourquoi Samuel fut-il tué?
So why did Samuel Paty die?
Pourquoi?
Why was he murdered?
Vendredi soir, j'ai d'abord cru à la folie aléatoire,
Friday
à
evening, I
l'arbitraire
thought it was
absurde.
just a lone wolf, sheer madness.
Une victime de plus
I thought it was just one more
du
victim
terrorisme
who
gratuit.
had fallen to gratuitous terrorism.
Après tout, il n'était pas la cible principale des
But
islamistes.
after all, he wasn't the
Il ne faisait
primary target of
qu'enseigner.
Islamist terrorists. He was just
Il n'était
teaching
pas
students.
l'ennemi de la religion dont ils
He
se
wasn't
servent.
an enemy
Il
of the
avait lu le
religion
Coran.
that people were trying
Il
to defend.
respectait ses élèves,
He had
quelle que
read the
soit leur
Quran. He
croyance.
respected all of
Il
his students,
s'intéressait
no matter
à la
what
civilisation
religion they
musulmane.
believed in.
Non,
Was he out to fight against
tout au
Islam?
contraire.
No. It was the exact opposite.
Samuel Paty
Samuel
fut
Paty
tué
was murdered
précisément
for
pour
the
tout cela,
very reason
parce qu'il incarnait
that
la République qui renaît
embodied
chaque jour dans les
the
salles
French
de
Republic, the
classe,
values of the French
la
Republic.
liberté qui se transmet
He
et se
embodied the
perpétue à
liberty
l'école.
that the French Republic wants to
Samuel
give to its
Paty
students through schools.
fut tué
Samuel Paty
parce que les islamistes
was
veulent
murdered
notre
because
futur.
Islamists want to
Et qu'ils
destroy our
savent
future.
qu'avec des héros tranquilles
And they
tels
know
que
that
lui,
with these calm, peaceful heroes like
ils
Samuel
ne
Paty,
l'auront jamais.
they will not prevail.
Eux séparent les fidèles et les mécréants.
They try to break
Samuel Paty ne
apart
connaissait que des
the
citoyens.
faithful
Eux se
from the
repaissent de
infidels.
l'ignorance. Lui
But
croyait
Paty
dans le savoir.
tried to show that he believed in knowledge
Eux
and the power of
cultivent
knowledge.
la haine
They
de l'autre.
They foster
Lui
hatred
voulait
of
sans
others.
cesse en voir le visage.
But he always sought
Découvrir
to
les
see
richesses de
the face behind the
l'altérité.
mask. He wanted to constantly understand others.
Samuel Paty
Samuel
fut la
Paty
victime de la
was a
conspiration
victim
funeste,
of some
de la
awful
bêtise,
conspiracy theory,
du mensonge,
silliness,
de
lies,
l'amalgame, de la haine de
of
l'autre,
cutting
de la
shortcuts,
haine de ce que profondément,
of the hatred of others,
existentiellement,
hatred
nous sommes.
of what we are.
Samuel Paty est devenu vendredi
On Friday,
le visage
Samuel
de la
Paty
République,
became the face of our French
de
Republic,
notre volonté de briser les
of
terroristes,
our desire
réduire
to
les
break down
islamistes,
terrorist networks,
de vivre
to
comme
break
une
down
communauté de
Islamist
citoyens libres
political
dans
Islamism,
notre pays.
to fight against
Le
all that
visage
will thwart
de
our
notre
nation. He
détermination
became the
à
face of our
comprendre,
steely determination
à
to
apprendre,
further understand and
à
learn,
continuer d'enseigner,
to continue to teach,
à être libre.
to be free.
Car nous continuerons, professeur.
For we will continue.
Nous défendrons la
We will
liberté
continue to be free.
que vous
We'll
enseignez si
continue
bien,
to defend those freedoms that you taught so
et nous
well.
porterons haut la laïcité,
We will carry high the
nous ne
standard bearers
renoncerons pas aux
of
caricatures,
secularism.
au dessin, même si d'autres reculent.
We will not
Nous offrirons
reel back in the face of
toutes les
cartoons
chances
while others
que
will.
la République doit à
We
toute
will
sa
honor all of
jeunesse,
the
sans
opportunities that the
discrimination
French
aucune.
Republic has to offer to all of its children.
Nous continuerons, professeur.
Dear teacher,
Avec
we
tous
will
les
continue.
instituteurs et professeurs de France,
With
nous
all
enseignerons
high
l'histoire,
school and
ses
primary
gloires
school
comme
teachers
ses
around France, we will
vicissitudes.
continue
Nous
to
ferons
uphold
découvrir la littérature, la musique,
their role in society. We'll
toutes les
continue to
œuvres
teach
de
literature,
l'âme et de
music,
l'esprit.
everything
Nous aimerons
that
de
uplifts
toutes
our
nos
souls.
forces le débat,
We will
les
continue
arguments
to teach the power of
raisonnables, les
debate, of
persuasions
argumentation,
aimables.
of
Nous aimerons
rhetoric.
la science et ses controverses, comme
We will
vous.
continue to love
Nous
science
cultiverons
in
la tolérance,
all
comme
of
vous. Nous
its
chercherons à comprendre sans relâche
differences,
et à
and
comprendre encore
we'll continue to
davantage
seek new
ceux-là
knowledge.
qu'on voudrait éloigner de nous.
We will continue to fight against all of those
Nous
people who would
apprendrons
take that away from us.
l'humour,
We will continue to learn
la
what it is to
distance.
laugh, what humor is.
Nous
We
rappellerons
will learn what it means to
que nos
take distance,
libertés ne tiennent que par la fin de la
because
haine
our freedoms will only
et de
stand
la
up
violence,
when we can truly fight
par
out
le respect de l'autre.
against hatred and teach mutual respect.
Nous continuerons, professeur.
Fellow teacher, we will continue.
Et tout au long de leur vie, les centaines de jeunes gens que vous avez
Throughout their
formés
lives, all of those young people that
exerceront
you
cet esprit
molded
critique
and taught
que vous leur avez
will
appris.
continue to use their critical thinking, critical
Peut-être
thought that you taught
certains
them.
d'entre eux deviendront-ils enseignants
Some
à
of them
leur
may
tour.
become teachers in their own right.
Alors, ils formeront des jeunes
And when that day
citoyens
comes, they too will
à leur tour.
shape
Ils
future
feront aimer la
citizens of the
République.
French Republic. They
Ils
will
feront
love the
comprendre
French Republic
notre nation, nos valeurs,
because they will understand
notre
what the values of our French nation, of what Europe.
dans une
Ah.
chaîne des temps qui ne s'arrêtera pas.
It is an ongoing movement of time and history that will not
continuerons.
stop.
Oui,
And in that time,
Ce
we will
combat
continue
pour la liberté
because we will
et
continue
pour
to
la
fight
raison
for freedom and
dont
reason,
vous êtes désormais le visage.
a fight of which you have become
Parce que
the
nous
visible
vous le
face.
devons.
And it is a fight that we owe it unto you to
Parce
continue
que-
forward.
Nous nous le devons.
We owe it to ourselves
Parce qu'en France, professeur,
because in France,
les lumières ne s'éteignent jamais.
the lights will never go out.
Vive la République,
Long live the French Republic,
vive la France.
long live France.
8 p.m. in the French capital, we're covering live the ceremony honoring Samuel Paty, that's a slain middle school teacher who's been decorated with the Legion of Honor by the French President Emmanuel Macron, who in his speech just a moment ago said that last Friday Samuel Paty became the face of our French Republic. Yeah, a very strong moment there. There was a minute of silence taking place after the Marseillaise was played out by the string section of the Republican Guard, and because there's people outside watching on a big screen outside the courtyard of the Sorbonne, we could hear their applause in tribute to that slain school teacher from outside of the walls of the courtyard of France's oldest and university, the Sorbonne. This is the conclusion now of the ceremony taking place as the coffin departs from that courtyard. There was a lot of emotional moments there. One of the students reading out a poem at one point, the letter of Albert Camus to his primary school teacher who inspired him, the Nobel Literature Laureate, and the speech by the French president. We're speaking here on France 24 with Gabrielle Atanzio, who teaches English at the Lycée Paul Robert, the French public high school that's in the northeast suburbs of Paris, in Les Lilas, from the French southwestern city of Toulouse, Racha Nagem, researcher in science and education at the University of Toulouse, and who is an associate member of the UNESCO Chair in Prevention of Radicalization and Violent Extremism, and France 24's very own Philip Turrell. Lots of points in that speech. Gabrielle Atanzio, I'm going to ask you something difficult here. To speak for your students, how do you think they'll receive the words of Emmanuel Macron?
Hopefully well. I'm pretty sure they will. It was not so much a speech about a teacher, it was a speech about the ideal teacher. Samuel Paty was that, of course, but I feel that this really was a speech about what the French promise is and what teachers can do for them too. And as I was listening to the 3-4 different speeches, all I could think of was how we describe our teachers. We remember how our teachers made us feel, much more so than we remember the content of the class. What did we talk about? We talked about teachers helping us become curious, becoming daring, thought-provoking, accepting of disagreements, with the right to be fallible, yet being capable and knowledgeable. This teaching really seems to be, as we listen to these beautiful speeches, it's about teaching the right ways of being. It's about inspiring much more so than it is about pure academic content, I felt. And I'm glad this is acknowledged, because this is a mission that is hard to measure, that is hard to really defend, but I think it's key. It's really what makes us a society.
What made you want to become a school teacher?
Oh, absolutely. What made me become a school teacher? A thirst for knowledge. I wanted to understand history, a drive to understand politics and where power was. And I think kids really have to understand this when they're faced with challenges such as the one that happened last week. This is so terrible. Hopefully people will make sense of it as we go on, and I think we'll help our kids try to process it all.
And there's 2 tracks in that speech for those who are not French, because there's the universal values of the 18th century enlightened philosophers that Emmanuel Macron alluded to, values of critical thinking, of inclusiveness of different points of view. And then there's something very French. He talked about the Republic. The French writer Marcel Pagnol, whose father was a teacher, writes at the outset of his first autobiographical book how his father was effectively a missionary for the state. Right. And the archbishop was the academic inspector. And this idea of incarnating the Republic. Do you feel that when you go to class in the morning?
Quite a weight on my shoulders. What I appreciate about the speech, the beginning of the speech of the president, was that he said it was less about radicalism or the enemy. It was more about what schools are. It was not so much about what we oppose. It's about what we might be already, or what we aspire to be, or where we're going. I'm of two minds when it comes to what you just described. On the one hand, yes, we become teachers because we want to do something that's meaningful.
Because that was in the context, this was the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century. That was in the context where the secular state had an adversary, and that was the Catholic Church at the time. Times have changed.
Absolutely. I think you're perfectly right. Now, is this a fight we feel we have to carry on? The context is quite different. I think the way I see it, if there's a crisis of responsibility and meaning, it's not so much the teachers, it's for the youth. I'm not sure the youth today is quite hopeful. It's hard for me to tell them that there is hope somewhere. so many talks about there, but no, I think, yeah.
Will they be inspired by this, or are they just going to be further downtrodden? That's the question, I guess. And I'll put it to you, Philip.
I think that the aim of any teacher is to transmit knowledge, transmit your own experiences, and transmit the things that you've learnt that will be useful to the students that you are teaching. That is the bottom line. And that was a message that Emmanuel Macron put forward tonight about the importance of teachers. You know, there were several things he said during that speech. It's about creating Republican citizens. That's the job of a teacher. Ignorance has no place in French society. He was the victim of what we are because he was cut down and murdered by intolerant people. So there were all messages of fraternity, which is part of the French, what they call it, the French motto, liberty, fraternity and equality. And it was Emmanuel Macron underlining the very basis of what the French Republic stands for.
And he made a whopping big promise. He said, in schools, we will train and protect teachers to do whatever it takes to be able to transmit those values, and particularly when it comes to teaching things like free speech. Now remember, he's had to make big promises as well to healthcare personnel. Sorry to be so crass and speak about money, but can he keep his promise to teachers?
I think it's not only a question of money. I think it's a question also of recognition and support for teachers. I think that in many cases, we've been hearing over the last few days, teachers have come forward and they've said things like, you know, we feel completely abandoned by our hierarchy. We're just left on our own to deal with these very complicated situations. And quite a lot of the time, we just won't talk about a subject because we don't want to get involved in an argument or provoke unrest in the class. Even though we have a point of view, we don't talk about it because we don't feel we're able to. And I think that is something, you don't need money to sort that out. You need support for those teachers concerned. And that may be part of the wake-up call, the message that we have heard tonight from Emmanuel Macron. Yes, we realise there's a problem for many teachers, and we're going to now take some steps to remedy that.
Did you hear that promise, Gabriel?
Sure, I did. I'm afraid I would feel crass talking about politics too much today. Yet, a couple years back, there was a law passed for schools called Loi sur l'école de la confiance, the law as to what the place of trust in schools. And I think what that law did is really frighten colleagues who cannot so much complain about their direct hierarchy. That's how we've understood that law with the union I'm a part of. I'm afraid that we have to rethink how we approach the organogram of schools right now. This is what Jean-Michel Blanquer will do. He will suggest
the education minister.
Yes, the Secretary of Education will say, it's in his book from 2016. He says, I would like, you know, headmistresses and to become more managers. And I'm afraid of that. I'm afraid we don't need more of a management culture in schools. I think we need better qualified teachers. And to answer you said it might be about money. Yes, today I'm not sure I would choose to become a teacher. Economically, I don't think I would make that decision now. I did it 10 years ago. As for now, I would be hesitant.
It's a vocation, for sure. Let's cross to the Sorbonne. France 24's Catherine Norris-Trent is there. Catherine, I was saying earlier, for us watching it on television, it's quite emotional because you had that sound delay. So while they're having the moment of silence inside, we could hear the tribute applause where you are.
Yeah, that's right. And it was a very moving ceremony here outside the Panthéon. The crowd of several hundred people gathered and stood in silence, and quite a lot of them had tears in their eyes as they watched this tribute to Samuel Paty tonight. From the moment his coffin was carried out to the strains of U2's One, people really started getting very emotional and listening very intently, of course, to all the speeches and the tributes. And you could see some of that emotion, I think, reflected in President Emmanuel Macron's speech. He also had what perhaps was a tear in his eye, and just after he finished speaking, as the the orchestra inside the Sorbonne played the Marseillaise, the French national anthem, people here spontaneously broke out into song, singing softly along with that, and then breaking out into applause. So an awful lot of emotion here tonight on the streets of central Paris, people feeling very still shocked and numb by this very brutal murder of a teacher who was doing his job in class.
It's going on 8:15 p.m. local time, Catherine, and a lot of people still behind you, not ready to leave, even though it's curfew in 45 minutes because of COVID.
Yeah, there are a few people around still, but a lot of them are trickling off into the night now. Of course, they're very aware of that curfew coming out at 9 p.m. Paris time. I think that's why this ceremony was obviously programmed to finish at 8:15 to give people the time to get home. So, there are a couple of people speaking, giving interviews, discussing some of the ideas we've been hearing from tonight from the president. But then they will be drifting off. I can see already the crowd is thinning quite a great deal.
Of the Sorbonne there. In his speech, Rasha Nagem, Emmanuel Macron said, was Samuel Paty out to fight against Islam? No, the exact opposite. What do you think of the French president's choice of words when he talked about religion and radicalism?
It's really delicate when we talk about religion, and we have to be careful about the terms we use. And I would prefer when he was talking about fighting terrorism, but the terrorism that he was talking about is only about Islamist terrorism, though we had different kind of terrorism. What I can say that, unfortunately, now in many speech we have this kind of using the terms Islam in order to talk about the ideological movement, violent movement, or Islamist movement, and we have to make the difference. Even in school, that's you can ask Gabrielle when you ask, can we talk about religion in school? Yes, we can talk about religion in school through history courses, or through when we talk about laicité and secularism, and what are the principles of secularism regarding religion. But when it comes to a political speech, we have to be really careful about these terms, because the students or the young people today are very confused about the true definition of laicité, of secularism. This principle which allows everyone to coexist, to build a society, to find common points beyond religious, racial, and cultural differences, today is not that clear for the student. It's not that clear. That's why we have to re-explain secularism. We have to re-explain secularism, and as you said, we have to maybe adapt it to the new context and what's going on today in our words. So yes, unfortunately, some terms can the misinterpretation of some terms will lead to a more radicalized thinking, cognitive thinking.
Rasha, 5 years ago, when there was the Charlie Hebdo attacks in Paris, there was this moment of national unity, but it didn't last long. What are the lessons learned from that this time? How do you federate everyone behind a project where schools are reinforced in their teaching of critical thinking?
Yes, the lesson learned is that we have to know that education is the core of the society. Education is very important, and we have to invest, as you said, we have to invest in this education. We have to give money, and the Macron said that he will give teacher a stronger position through training, which is very important training today, to teacher a training about what's going on, about the conflicts, about how to prevent radicalization, how to prevent extremism is very important, and about the protection of the teacher from pressure and ignorance, as he said. Through all forms of knowledge, as I said, and to foster critical thinking. Critical thinking is very important. Critical thinking is not about, the student is not here only as an auditor and listening to a professor talking about the way we can foster this. The student has to participate in an action that he himself feels that and understand the mechanism of for instance, of propaganda on internet, of how we deconstruct conspiracy theory. So it's very important that from this one side, from the teacher side, that we support teacher, and from the other side that we support also students by giving them means to understand and express themselves about what's going on today.
I want Gabriel Latanzio on that point to your reaction to something that Philip Turrell said earlier about how it's so touchy talking about issues regarding free speech. Do you show the caricatures of Charlie Hebdo or not, the cartoons of the Prophet? That many teachers are going to self-censor and say, hey, I'm just going to wipe my hands of this. Is that the feeling that you have, that there's going to be more or less self-censorship and that it's just too difficult to go there?
Teachers are very courageous. I would stress the qualities of my colleagues. People have spent a bit of time with their kids during lockdown, and they've realized how difficult it is to teach 2-3 kids if they have that many. Well, when we have 35, we have to do that much more. I think where fundamentalism wins is in its simplicity. The question you've asked now really is also about how do we teach the separation of church and state, how do we teach free speech, etc., and so on. For fundamentalists, for bigots, it's simple. What is wrong is forbidden. But for modern societies, democracies such as ours, well, sometimes some things are wrong, yet we don't quite entirely say you shouldn't do it. It's a bit more complex and nuanced. You know, you also asked another precious question, and I'm glad this conversation is happening. It's quite important. What do we tell kids? I think the key is that you have to make knowledge the goal in itself. I think this is where culturally we're shifting in the wrong direction. You don't make careers the goal. In recent years, past reforms of education have stressed how we help students along the way of finding a career. And believe me, I care about that, especially for people who don't have the resources or the know-how to, even write a motivation letter, which I do with my students all the time. This is not me teaching them English. This is me giving them life skills. But still, even though most underprivileged people need help with such life skills, we still need to make knowledge the goal in itself. I think that's the key. And that's the kind of teacher we need.
All right. The humanistic values that incorporate all different aspects. Gabriel Latanzio, I want to thank you so much for joining us. Rasha Nagem for being with us from Toulouse. Philip Turrell. And we want to thank you. More coverage on this story and on the investigation into it on our website, france24.com.